Real quick before we get started, I'm enjoying doing these IDW Transformer issue breakdowns. And you know me, I'm not a like, comment, and subscribe kind of guy. I've never asked any of you to ring a bell or whatever that is for notification. I've never done it for myself or other people. I don't expect anybody else to do it for me. However, if this IDW stuff doesn't find an audience and starts to hurt the algorithm of my channel, I obviously can't continue to produce it because I can't sort of undo what I'm doing for the sake of something I want to do, if that makes sense. So my advice is, if you like this sort of content and you want to see it remain on my channel and not go behind the paywall on Patreon, to sort of share it around and spread it through word of mouth and put it in groups or whatever you got to do in order to bring attention to it. Otherwise, I'm probably going to have to take it off my channel. But of course, I'm going to give it a couple more months to see how it shakes out because I'd like to see it remain on my channel. But time will tell. Let's get started. So we continue with our IDW breakdown, and this time with issue of Robots in Disguise number 4, written by John Barber, art by Andrew Griffith, additional art by Casey Collar, colors by Josh Perez, letters by Sean Lee, and edits by Carlos Guzman. And this issue opens with Prowl and RC having a conversation, and RC expresses that she's aware that Prowl is behind the explosion of the lost light, or at least the perceived explosion of the lost light. And Prowl doesn't really deny it. He does say, "I didn't," but after that, he sort of lets her consciousness flow, which is very Prowl because he ends up learning more about her than he does in terms of defending himself, and he doesn't really see any need to defend himself. But it does give you an insight as to potential Autobot speculation of what Prowl is capable of. But they're interrupted by Wheeljack, who claims there's been another murder of a Decepticon. Now, this Decepticon, his name is Skydive, not to be confused with the Autobot version. And his dead body was found on a pile of trash by none other than Dirge, who at the time was with Swindle, kind of discussing and debating their current state as Decepticons in the landscape, specifically in regards to Starscream and how some of their jobs could have been potentially grueling, but they keep ending up in relatively sweet spots. And they're kind of debating the idea of Starscream is still looking out for them behind closed doors, despite what he's sort of projecting forward to the Cybertronian population. But now that Prowl has become aware, him and Wheeljack show up at the potential crime scene and sort of start their investigation. And of course, their lead witness is going to be Dirge, who is the Decepticon that stumbled across the body. And all Dirge keeps saying is, "I did not see anything," despite any line of questioning or form of communication. And during the midst of that, Prowl spots what seems to be an Insecticon, none other than Bombshell, hidden between the metal plates of Dirge's armor amongst his circuitry. But it's not actually Bombshell. It's one of Bombshell's Cerebro shells that he uses for manipulation of other bots. Bombshell himself is actually busy manipulating Sunstorm, brainwashing him into kind of doing his bidding in typical sort of Bombshell fashion, right? But while he's manipulating and brainwashing Sunstorm, Sunstorm is attacked from the back by RC, who has arrived with Prowl and Dirge, because Wheeljack was able to find the incoming signal that was on the Cerebral shell that Dirge was carrying around and trace it back to Bombshell's location. And Prowl says to him, "You're under arrest for murder and treason." And Bombshell replies, "You'll never take me alive. You have no authority over me." To which Prowl retorts, "I have access to your ID chip, though, and I'm done messing around." And Bombshell says, "Chip does not work." And now the kind of cat is out of the bag that not all of these ID chips or these prohibitors that are in the Decepticons may be functioning properly. Of course, it could be an isolated incident with Bombshell, but Prowl is the type to sort of extrapolate that to its furthest possibility. Nonetheless, a fight ensues, and of course, Dirge takes the side of Bombshell, either due to the brainwashing or his own choices. That much isn't quite clear yet, but Prowl calls for backup from Blur, who of course comes in super hot, but not quite fast enough, and Bombshell is able to duck into the reclamation tunnels, sort of adding a layer of challenge for Blur to actually catch up with him. Meanwhile, RC and Prowl are continuing to fight Sunstorm and Dirge, and in the midst of that, RC kills Sunstorm. And Prowl actually says you didn't have to kill him, which is an interesting thing for Prowl to say because that's not usually his disposition. But we cut to Blur, who while chasing Bombshell ends up in a seemingly sprung trap with 5 of the 6 Constructicons backing up Bombshell. However, one of those Constructicons is no longer with us, and that's Scrapper, who was killed at the hands of Spike Witwicky in Phase 1. Hopefully we'll get a chance to address that at another time. But while the Constructicons have Blur surrounded, RC and Prowl have a vantage point from higher above. And of course, RC springs right into combat in typical IDW RC fashion. And as the fight ensues, Prowl says, Ratbat's dead. I can blame RC or I can blame myself. Either way, I'm compromised. Starscream and I have conspired to hide the facts. I've broken the laws I'm charged to enforce. I've made implicit deals with monsters, but I do it all for the greater good. And when I feel doubt creeping in, I think about Spike Witwicky, who betrayed him in all of the Transformers really in Phase 1. Once again, story for another time. But while Prowl is thinking this, he locks Bombshell between doorways that he has access to controlling on Cybertron. And he says, what are you doing? Who are you working with? And Bombshell says, I'll never tell. And Prowl says, I believe you, and executes him. At which point, the plant that Bombshell had placed on Dirge ceases to function, and Dirge sort of comes back to life. And now is a witness to the execution of Bombshell at the hands of Prowl. Prowl yells to him, don't get involved, don't attack, don't do anything. Dirge throws a hunk of metal at him and takes off. At which point Prowl signals to RC to give chase to Dirge, which RC reluctantly does, and Prowl faces the Constructicons and threatens them by saying, surrender or I'll detonate your ID chips. Once again, relying on these ID chips, but also it's a testing ground, right, to see if they're actually functioning for all members, or if it's an isolated incident with Dirge, or if it's a more widespread issue. And the Constructicons say, sorry, Prowl, that ain't gonna work. We're gonna detonate you. This is just not your lucky day. And Prowl replies, that's right. Luck's got nothing to do with it. Your ID chips are blocked in the tunnels, huh? Subsystem bypass, override ID network. You should believe it when they say I'm calculating, and cold, and hits the button, and it pretty much blows the head off the remaining 5 Constructicons. That won't be the last we see of them, but no spoilers. Meanwhile, RC's chasing Dirge, and I'm not sure if she allows him to, or he's able to, but somehow he gets away. He transforms and takes off, and RC's sort of left carrying Blur's broken body. And the next time we see the Autobots, they're back at some sort of med bay type environment, and Blur is obviously upset with how things went down and says, you crossed the line to Prowl. You ordered me in with no backup. You knew the danger and you didn't tell me. Prowl says, calm down. I was your backup. We uncovered a Decepticon conspiracy that's bigger than either of us. He continues by saying, you know I'm right. It doesn't matter what Starscream says about his other pals' innocence. Bombshell and the Constructicons were just the beginning. Trust me, playtime's over. We can't have Decepticons walking around our planet like everything's okay anymore. And Bumblebee, who is now there, interrupts him and says, Prowl, that's Blur. He's one of us. He's been with us since before Prime got the Matrix. And Prowl answers with, it doesn't matter anymore. You said this is a new era, B. We have to take control of it no matter who gets in our way. And that's how issue 4 of Robots in Disguise closes. So this book begins to sort of lay the foundation for ideas that come later, specifically at the hands of Prowl, which should have come to none of us as a surprise, right? That should have been within the realms of our expectations. But it kind of addresses the idea of rules and regulations, right? Policies and procedures, that the guidelines for keeping everybody sort of playing by the same rules and respecting the same boundaries only work if we're all playing by the same rules and respecting the same boundaries. And Prowl is obviously willing to sacrifice those rules and sacrifice those boundaries, and alludes to the idea that he's been in cahoots with Starscream for some time and perhaps has been breaking these rules from day one. That doesn't mean that it's not justified, right? There's obviously other things at play. There's ID chips being rendered null and void behind the scenes, and that obviously raises the threat of potential Decepticon sabotage and treachery, right? But all of these things are sort of happening and conspiring and taking place simultaneously around the same time that this new government and new idea of civilization is being born. And the problem with that is you can't build a new utopian society on the foundation of deceit, because you will eventually reap what you sow, as time will tell. Anyway, hope that helps, and I'll be back next month with 2 more installments of our IDW coverage. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Until next time, take care.